Welcome back, csc230 class, to EX5 Jumbotron, and we already had our kind of overview or intro. So this will really be part one, because this will be the video where we actually start coding, and we are going to code from scratch. This is kind of the finished product. I've worked more on it, and I've done a little more of the responsive, and we're going to be working towards this and adding more. It's certainly not finished. You know, I don't know if I'm going to keep the orange down here with orange type or anything, but we'll make some changes as we go. But one thing I just want to point out here is that this thing, when you resize it, it goes to a point where the navigation menu at the top disappears, and then it brings up this little hamburger menu here. And if you click on it, it shows a menu that actually drops down here, and it could kind of toggle on and off, and we're going to put that in eventually. But this is kind of our finished product, and a couple other things I want to show you before we start coding. If you go to my Warren, on the documents and resources, I do have a link under links code to the Bootstrap Jumbotron template. So if you want to look at that, that's kind of the basis for what we're working on. Not exactly, but it's kind of our basis. We're changing the breakpoints a little bit more, and we're changing some of the layout. But if you need to look at this, you could check this out. And also, I'm going to mention, there's a link down here, and I'll just mention it. It's the Emmet cheat sheet, and we're going to be working with Emmet. And you might not know what Emmet is yet, but once you see it in action, you're going to enjoy Emmet and appreciate how fast it'll make coding go. So I'll close that up as well. And where we're really going to start is we're going to go to Cloud 9, and I already opened up my 230 workspace. And here's my 230 workspace. It's opened up. I have a folder here called EX5 Finished. We're going to make a brand new folder. This is the finished version here. And you can see I have an EX5 CSS file. I have an index file. But I did work through all of this and did all the code myself first, just to make sure if I ran into any problems, I could kind of take care of it, and as I kind of guide you through this. And we are going to start from scratch, but it won't take that long, at least to write some of the code. It won't be as bad as it looks. I know it looks kind of bad. So I'm going to close these up right now, and I'll close this up. And you're going to make a brand new folder called EX5, and we'll just call it EX5 Jumbotron. And the way to do that, if you go File here, you're going to see New File, but you're not going to see New Folder. So you have to right-click on this on your workspace folder. So I'll just right-click on here, and I'll choose New Folder, and I'll just call it EX5. And I'll just put -Jumbotron, and that'll be my folder. And then we're going to put two files in there. We're going to have an index file, and we're going to have our ex5.css file. I'll save them both now. I'll go New File, and right away, so that it knows that it's HTML, I'm going to save this as index.html and make sure it's going in the Jumbotron folder, and it's showing that it is. So I'll call it index.html and save it in there. And even if I want to, I could even make a new file. I'll make another file too, and I'll save this as our CSS file. And there's nothing in it right now, but I'll still save it. And I'll just call it ex5.css. That way I have both of my files all ready to go in my EX5 Jumbotron folder, my EX5 CSS, my index file. And I'm going to close my CSS. I don't need it quite yet. And I'm going to go to my index, and I have nothing here. And I'll show you some shortcuts on how to make it a little bit faster. We're going to start off by just putting a exclamation point, and then we're going to hit the tab key. And look at that. It already filled in all this kind of introductory stuff in our HTML page. It put in our declaration. It put in our language attribute of English. It put in our head tags. It even put our open and closing body tags. It put our whole structure for our HTML page. It also put a char set of UTF-8. It put our viewport. That's for responsive, so we don't have to do that. It also put this for Internet Explorer Edge. Kind of made that compatible. I'm not even sure exactly what that does. I'd have to check that out. And we're going to put our link to our CSS right after this. But first we're going to put in our title, and I'm just going to call it EX5 Jumbotron Responsive. And then after this, I'm going to type link, just link, and then hit tab. It starts to create my link for my style sheet. So already, look how fast that went. And we're going to link to our ex5.css. So I can just put that in there. So now I have that set up already, and that's pretty much all I need in my head tag so far. So we're going to start working on our body, which is going to go in here. And what we're going to start off with, and again, just to look at this before I close this up, we're going to have a header section. We're going to have a Jumbotron section. We're going to have a main column section, and then we're also going to have a footer section. Now, they're not all going to be sections. This will actually be a header. This will just be a div class of Jumbotron. This will be section with main column class name, and then we'll have footer, and we may use a class name. So we'll be using a lot more class names. Class names we could use more often, and you're going to see class names more with WordPress and Bootstrap and CSS Grid. You're going to see class names used a lot more. IDs are meant to use once on a page. Class names you could use multiple times, so they're a little more common. So we're going to use those a little bit more, but they work almost interchangeably. And also what we're going to do when we make our sections here, each one of them is going to have a container inside of it. Not one big container, but a container inside of it just to kind of hold everything in there. It'll help hold 3 columns in there and help them float better. And our containers are going to be used to actually hold our content in place. If you notice when I resize this, this kind of moves a little bit because we're actually setting our containers to be 80% of our window. And it's also going to have some built-in padding, so we're going to use those to kind of hold everything in here. Let's go back to our code. Now, we didn't really do any of our content yet that we're actually going to see, and we're going to use Emmet a little bit more with this, and I'll show you what we could do with this. We're going to start off with after body. I'm going to hit return here, and everything's going to be a child of body, so just keep that in mind. And the first thing we're going to set up is going to be something called header, so we're going to set up a header first. Now, header is an element, so you can type header, and we're using shortcuts here. Now, inside header, we're going to make something called a div, which is just a division of our HTML page, and it's going to have a class called container. So we're going to put a greater than sign here, and I'm going to put div dot container. And what that does so far, I'm making a header, and it's going to have a child in it that's called div with the class name container. The dot means class name. If it was an ID, I could put a pound sign. And it really doesn't matter right here, but well, actually it does, because we're going to use container multiple times, so we're going to use a class for that. And then inside of that, we're probably going to have something like a nav bar in there. We're probably going to have a nav element, because there is a nav element, and we'll give it a class name called nav bar. And we're not sure what we're going to put in yet, so we might just stop right here. And what this will do, by just typing this, and we're going to hit tab. Right after this, we'll hit tab, and this will kind of activate the built-in Emmet. I'll hit tab, and you can see what it does. It created a header, and then a child of class equals container, and then also a child inside that that's a class of navbar, where we're going to build our nav. We're also going to put our our company name in there, and I'll put that on the same level that I could just type in, and I'll just make that a paragraph dot, and I'll call it company name. I'll give it a class just so if I want to kind of style that specifically for that paragraph, I'll say p.company name, and then I'll hit tab, or I could even put some content in here. If you use curly brackets, you can actually put in the text that you're going to put in there, and I'll just put company, and then I'll hit tab. And you can see what it did. It made a paragraph class with company name as its class name, and then it wrote company name in there, and it finished off the tag. So already it's helping us a little bit write our HTML code. So that's kind of our first section there, our header section. And we're going to have to build our nav bar in there, and I'm just going to kind of move on and work on some of the other sections, and then we'll come back and add some more detail. Now let's take a look at this a second. It's going to have company name, and then we're going to have kind of a nav bar over here, and we're going to set this up with line items that are kind of links in here. They don't link anywhere yet. We're not going to have them link to any pages yet. They eventually will, but we'll set these up. So these will be anchor links here, and they'll actually be in line items, because with web development, we typically put our links for nav menus inside line items. It's just easier to work with them as a list. And we're going to take that list and kind of put it on one line, and we'll kind of style that. Now we'll look at our Jumbotron. Now we basically have an H1 that says welcome, and we have a little paragraph of type here, and there's, I don't know, maybe 20 words here, and I'll show you something else we could do. So I'll do that next. I'll do the Jumbotron. And remember, this is going to be after header, so I'm going to go after header here. Actually, I'm going to go back, and I'll just say begin Jumbotron. And I can highlight this, and if you do command, if you're on a Mac, command, if you're on Windows, I believe would be control. I didn't try it on Windows yet. And the / or the question mark, so control question mark. And if you highlight that, it should comment something for you. It'll also work for CSS. And now I'm going to begin Jumbotron. We're going to call this a section with a class name Jumbotron. Then inside of here, section with a class name Jumbotron. And then we're also going to have the div container. So we're going to do another child, and it'll be div dot container. And then inside the container, we're also going to have an h1, and that'll be a child of the container. So we're going to put an h1 that says welcome. So I'll put h1, and I'll use curly brackets, and inside those curly brackets, I'll type welcome. Let me stop there. I don't want to do too much. I'll stop there. And there it is. So now we have this set up. And after the h1, we're going to put a paragraph. Actually, I'll use Emmet for this, and this is pretty neat. I could do p, and then inside of p, so I'll use the little kind of child, the greater than symbol. Inside of p, I'm going to type lorem, and I'm going to put 20 and hit tab. And what it does is it makes a paragraph with lorem ipsum, this placeholder text, with basically with 20 words in it. And if I want to wrap this, view, wrap lines, make sure we wrap the lines. And that's kind of our paragraph that's in there. And then we're also going to have a button. But I'll put button, and I'll put a class name of btn, and then I'll hit tab. Because we're going to kind of make a generic button that we're going to use, and then we're going to also make another class that'll kind of give it a different color. So we're going to kind of build a button that we're going to use, and we can make it a button class. And we could also put a link in here too. So if we want to link something inside this button, we could link it. So we could even, just to show you how the link works, you could do a, and then if you do two kind of square brackets there, one on either side, I'll just hit tab, and you can see it does aref. So it does both my opening and closing anchor links, and I'll just put in a pound sign just as a placeholder for now. And if I want to preview what I'm doing here, because I know I'm looking at the other version, but if I want to preview it, I could do a live preview, and it opens up over here. So that's what it looks like so far, and that's fine. We didn't put our nav bar over here, but that's what we want so far. And if you want to open this in a separate tab, you could do that. So here it is in a separate tab. And then if I do that, I could close this up. So we have our header, we have our section. Next is going to be main column, so I'm going to make another section. So I'll go here and do another section, and again I'll try to use Emmet section dot, and I'll call it main call. We'll call it main call or main calls. We'll do it that way, main for columns. And then inside there, we're going to have our container, which is a div dot container inside there. And then inside there, we're also going to have 3 more kind of columns. If you look at these, we have these column A, column B, column C here. So we have 3 kind of sections here that we're going to, and we'll call these call for now. We eventually may have to make them like a call A, column B, column C, but we'll just call them call for now, COL. So inside the container, we're going to make 3 of those. So we could do this. We could do div.call, and I'll have a class of call. They could be the same to start. And we could do times 3, which should make 3 of them. And we could hit tab. We'll see what happens here. And that's what it did. It made, there's our section class of main calls. Then we have a class called container, which we've been using, the same one. And now we have 3 classes, which are all columns. And this is where our type is going to go in there. And actually, putting 3 doesn't really help us, because we could probably make 1 and then copy it, because we have to put some more stuff inside here. And what we're going to put in here, we have a heading. Well, maybe we'll make that an H2. And then we have basically a little paragraph here. Maybe it'll have like 30 words in here. And then we're also going to have a button down here as well. That'll say view details. So it's probably better off just to do 1. You can see how it's, when we set up, you can multiply things, but I'll put in 1 here. And so then I'll put this on its own line. And what's going to go in here is going to be, first of all, there's going to be an H2. I'll just type H2, and I don't need any class or anything for this. I'll just do H2. And then inside the H2, I could use my curly brackets, and I could just type, I'll type column A and hit tab. And then after this, I'll do a P, and inside the P, I'll do lorem, and I'll do a 30, and and I'll hit tab, and there's my paragraph. And then after this, I'll make a button dot btn, and I'll hit tab, and that's good for now. And inside the button will be, I guess, view details. And actually what I could do, I could even do the A in there like I did before. I did the anchor link, so I could do A and then the square brackets and hit tab. And now I have my link all set up, so now I could put view details. Rather than putting it after, it's easier to put it before. And I think it uses like two arrows after it. And I think that works better than, if you use one, I think it's going to create a problem with confusing with the HTML tags, but that should be all right. And then once we do that, we could basically copy this column, the whole div. Make sure you get the closing div. And I'll paste it over this one. And then I'll paste it again over the last one. And I'll just call this one B, and I'll call this one C. And I'll save what I have, take a look at it, and this is okay right now. Obviously we don't have things floating, but we want to get all our content in here. And for some reason our H1s look like the H2s. They should be a little bit smaller. I'm not sure why they're all the same. All right, and the last part of this, if we just look at our original sample, now we have our H2s, we have our paragraph with lorem, we have buttons down here. Our last section is just going to be a footer, and what we can do here is just go, now let's look where we are. Here was the main column, so we're finishing after the main columns. We're going to do a footer, so I'm just going to type footer, and I'll give it a class name of copyright, because that's all I'm putting in here right now. And then even if I want to put a p tag in here, I could hit tab, and there's my paragraph, and I'll just put copyright, and I'll put, to write copyright, you do the ampersand copy and a semicolon and then a space, and I'll just put copyright 2018 WCCC csc230 class, and that's fine for our copyright. So now we have our footer, we have our two sections, we have a section Jumbotron and we have a section main columns, and we have a footer down here. So we have pretty much most of our content. If we just want to finish off our nav, one thing I left out was the nav, so we'll put our nav up here, and this shouldn't be that hard. Now it's a little more because there's a little more stuff in here, so it's going to be inside navbar. So I'm going to have to break this line here, and inside what I'm going to do is I'm going to make an unordered list. So I'll just type UL, and then inside UL I'll put it, since it's a child, I have to put the greater than sign, and I'll put LI times 3, or actually times 4. I think we're going to have 4 of them. We're going to have A, and then that'll just kind of fill it up there. And then inside of those A's, well, we don't have to put anything in there because we could type that in. It's only 3 things. So we have our unordered list, we have our lines, and then we also have our anchors, and that should be all we need. So we're just gonna hit our tab key, and there it is, and we'll fill in these things. And what's gonna go inside here is actually gonna be, we're just gonna call it home, and links in here. If you want to just put in kind of placeholder links, you could put # home, # about. I'll get rid of the extra space in here, and we pretty much have our structure. So we pretty much have our HTML done. Hopefully working with Emmet kind of helped speed up the process a little bit. We didn't have to copy and paste any lorem or anything like that. So we have our HTML done. So I'm going to stop here and take a break, and then what we'll continue with is we'll start using our CSS. We'll open up our CSS file and just from the top down start building and start making this start to look more like this.